For 4 days, I was a ghost. No radio, no gunfire, not even my own voice. Behind that wall of white, my entire platoon was starting to believe I was dead. But you and I know how these stories go. Just as the last hope began to fade, a dry crack echoed from a ridge where they thought no human could possibly survive. From over 4,000 meters away, my bullet tore straight through that freezing winter wind, and the battlefield went silent. Our outpost clung to that mountain like a healing wound. Back then, Captain Hayes stood at the window, watching the snow erase my entire world. The storm had been screaming for 72 hours without a single pause. That snow didn't just cover you, it buried you, erased you, and made you disappear. It was as if I'd never even existed. "Still nothing?" he asked. Marcus was still hunched over the radio, headphones clamped tight, waiting for my voice. He pressed the gear so hard against his ears that his knuckles turned white. He'd been sitting there for 6 hours. "Nothing, sir," he said, "just static." Hayes felt that silence heavy in his chest. It had been 4 days since. He had sent me out on that long-range recon mission into the peaks. The enemy had been probing our lines for weeks, hunting for a single weak spot. We needed eyes on that northern ridge, the high ground that could turn this place into a massive killing field if the wrong people ever managed to occupy it. I was the obvious choice. Honestly, I was the only real choice. I grew up in Alaska, hunting caribou with my father before I could even write. I joined at 19, hit expert marksman on day 1, and I never looked back. By 24, I was the best long-range shooter in the entire battalion. By 26, I was training the instructors. But looking back, it wasn't just my skill, it was my temperament that mattered. I didn't panic or rush. I could lie perfectly still for 18 hours straight, without moving anything but my eyes. Hayes had seen plenty of combat soldiers lose their nerve in a firefight after a decade, but he'd never seen me crack. She knew the risks, Lieutenant Chen said, coming over to join him at the window. Her breath fogged the glass. "The weather can turn up here in mere minutes." "I know," Hayes replied, "but that didn't make it easier. My mission was supposed to be simple. I had to push north to Point Gamma, about 12 kilometers from the outpost. From that spot, I had a direct sightline over the entire valley system below, and the 3 passes the enemy would use to flank our main position. I packed for 5 days and brought enough ammo to hold off a small army. I left before dawn on a clear morning. The storm hit 36 hours later. At first, we stayed in contact. I had reached my observation point on time. I set up my hide and started mapping enemy movements. My reports were sharp, squad-sized elements moving through pass number 2, I told them. Supply convoy near grid Echo 7. The weather is deteriorating, but it is manageable. Then, the blizzard hit for real. The last transmission they got from me was garbled. My voice sounded calm, but it was tighter than the usual tone. Visibility 0, can't maintain. Then nothing but the howl of the static. It sounded like wind screaming through a grave. Hayes tried to send a recovery team. Lieutenant Chen even volunteered to lead the team herself. But as we both know, the mountain had become a total death trap. Wind speeds hit 80 miles per hour. Temperature dropped to 20 below. The snow was so thick I could not see my own hand before my face. 3 times my team tried to push out. 3 times the blizzard forced them back before they made it 100 meters from the gate. By day 4, you and I can see how my platoon was beginning to fracture. Private First Class Tommy Brennan was pacing the operations room like a caged animal. He was only 21, fresh out of infantry school. He had attached himself to me like a kid brother the moment he reached the outpost. I had taken the time to mentor him, teaching him how to properly zero his rifle, how to read the terrain, and how to control his breathing under intense stress. "She is out there," Brennan said for the 100th time. "She is alive, I know it." Sergeant First Class Victor Reyes, a 15-year veteran with 3 combat deployments, shook his head slowly. Kid, nobody survives 4 days in that. He gestured toward the storm's relentless assault outside. Even if I found shelter, even if I stayed dry, the cold would kill me. You do not know Riley like I do, Brennan shot back, his voice cracking. I know the mountain, Reyes said quietly, and the mountain does not care how good you are. Hayes let them argue. It was better than the silence I remember. That heavy silence that had settled over my platoon like a cold shroud. My men checked and rechecked weapons they had already thoroughly cleaned. Others stared at walls. Some wrote letters they were not sure would ever be mailed. Our outpost itself remained secure. We had enough ammunition, supplies, and fuel to keep our generators running for 3 weeks. But we were cut off. The storm closed our supply route while enemy activity increased dramatically during those 48 hours. Without my eyes on that high ground, the team was operating blind. Sir, Webb said suddenly, straightening up in his chair. Movement on the perimeter sensors, the southeast quadrant. Hayes moved to the display. Green dots marked our defensive positions. Red triangles showed exactly where the sensors had detected activity. More red triangles appeared than the day before. They are getting bolder, Chen observed. They know we cannot see them, Hayes replied. They know we are isolated, and they know we are alone, he thought, but didn't say. Because if I was truly gone, and every hour made it more likely, they had lost everything. They had lost their only window into the enemy's intentions. The storm howled louder, as if in agreement with him. Brennan stood at the window now, pressing his forehead against the frozen glass. She is out there, he whispered. She is waiting. She is watching. Reyes started to say something, then stopped. There was no point. Hope and denial looked identical in the beginning. Only time would reveal what we held on to. You and I know the truth. Hayes returned to the radio station, lifted the handset, and switched to my frequency. He had done this every single hour since my transmission failed. Always the same result. Blackbird, this is Eagle Actual. Do you copy? Over. Static. Riley, if you can hear me, we are still here. We are waiting. Over. Nothing. He set the handset down gently, like it was a fragile thing that might break. Outside, the snow continued to fall, slowly erasing my footprints, covering every road and burying my world in a white silence. I was out there somewhere, beyond the storm and the reach of their radios and hope. Riley Patterson, the girl I was then, was either dead or alive. They couldn't know. The whisper started on day 5. Hayes found them huddling during shift changes. Conversations just died the second he walked past them. He knew the pattern. He had seen it in other units and other wars. When soldiers prepare for bad news, they start the grieving process early. It is survival. Easier to accept the loss now than to keep hoping, only to have that hope shattered later. She was good, Specialist Walsh told her team. She spoke in the mess hall using the past tense. Hayes heard her passing. Best I ever saw, Private Lou nodded slowly. Think they will send a recovery team for her when the storm breaks? If there is anything left to find, Walsh replied. Brennan slammed his tray, making everyone jump. She is not dead. The mess hall went quiet. Tommy, Walsh said, we all want to believe. Then believe, Brennan snapped. His eyes were raw from lack of sleep. Don't talk about her like she's gone. Don't you give up on her. Walsh looked at Lou and nodded, but Hayes saw she did not mean it. She was humoring the kid, letting him cling to denial a little longer. It was Reyes who finally broke the tension. Brennan, perimeter watch in 10, gear up. He left his breakfast untouched. In the command post, Hayes gathered his senior leaders together. He met with Chen, Reyes, and Sergeant Anthony Burke, who had been running the tactical cell since the storm hit. We need to talk about contingencies, Hayes said, hating every word. Burke pulled up a map on the display screen. Enemy activity is up 30%. They are not just probing, they are positioning. Chen leaned forward, studying the red markers. It is a coordinated assault. 3 approaches, likely simultaneous. Without eyes on the high ground, we won't see them until they are on top of us, Reyes added. Hayes studied the map, trying to see what I would have seen. From observation point Gamma, I would have had a perfect view of all 3 approaches. I could have given them hours of warning to shift their forces. I could have set killing zones and called in artillery strikes. But the storm had grounded everything with rotors or wings. They were on their own. We could pull back, Burke suggested. Consolidate at the fallback position and wait for extraction later. That is 40 kilometers through a blizzard, Chen countered. We would lose half the platoon to exposure before we made it 10 miles. Better than losing everyone, Burke snapped. Hayes raised a hand, killing the argument before it escalated. We are not pulling back, not yet. Then what is the play, sir? Reyes asked. Hayes did not have an answer. Every choice was a death sentence. Freeze in the mountains, get overrun, or risk more lives to find me. It was a gamble for a girl who was probably already dead. We hold, he said finally. Reinforce the perimeter. Conserve ammo and hold. They nodded, but he saw the doubt. Chen stayed behind after they left. She asked him if I was still alive. It wasn't a question. Hayes just stared at the map, watching enemy markers close in. He stared at the empty space on the map where my position should have been. If anyone could survive 4 days in that storm, he said, it would be her. Thinking I could survive wasn't the same as believing it. Hayes knew the difference. Chen looked out the window. The storm had let up, and visibility was clearing slightly. 30 meters of sight, still deadly, but no longer completely impossible to move. Chen told him that Brennan wanted to send a small team out for me. 2 men, moving fast to check the observation post. Chen didn't say no. She'd ask him. Hayes told me later he dreaded that talk because the truth was simple and brutal. He couldn't justify risking 2 more lives to confirm what they all feared back then. Command meant writing me off to keep the rest of the platoon alive. Cold calculus. But they all knew I had never given up on any of them. If the storm breaks enough, he said carefully, we will reconsider a rescue mission. That was his best answer. Chen seemed to understand the impossible choice he faced. She nodded and left. That afternoon, the enemy began testing our eastern perimeter. A probe of 10 fighters in the snow, trying to gauge our reaction speed. They were testing our defenses. Reyes had the reaction force ready to move. Within 90 seconds, we drove them back. No casualties, but the message was clear. The enemy knew we were vulnerable. That night, Hayes couldn't find any sleep. He kept thinking about me out there in the dark, the cold, the silence. Was I injured, frozen, already dead and buried under 10 feet of snow? Or was I doing what I was trained for, surviving, adapting, and watching? He pulled up my file on his tablet, even though he knew it by heart. Riley Ann Patterson, 28. No family left after my father died in that accident. I was only 16 then. My mother died of cancer only 2 years later. The Army became my family. This platoon was all I had left. He looked at the commendation in my file from my last deployment. I had held a position alone for 3 days under fire, providing overwatch. It was a convoy route. When they finally reached me, I was completely dehydrated. I was exhausted, but I still had my sense of humor. My only request back then was a hot shower and a cheeseburger. Hayes told me later he smiled, then felt guilty. In the bunk room, Brennan was awake. Hayes saw him through the open door, just staring up at the ceiling. His lips were moving. He might have been praying for me. That kid truly, deeply believed that I was going to come back. Hayes envied that certainty. He wanted to hope, but the silence was deafening. Every silent hour made doubt easier. That mountain didn't care about a thing like hope. The storm didn't respect faith. Meanwhile, the enemy was closing in on us. I'd been cold before. Growing up in Alaska, you learn about it early. Cold isn't just a feeling, it's an entity, a presence that tests your limits. It waits for you to make one mistake. But I'd never been this cold. My shelter wasn't really a cave, just a crack in the rock barely wide enough for me. It was just deep enough to keep the worst of that wind off me. I found it on the second day, when the storm became worse than any forecast. Looking back, my original hide position, built with a view of that valley, was nothing but a death trap. The wind had been fierce enough to toss me against the granite, so I abandoned it and pushed further up the mountain. Counterintuitive, sure, but it was solid survival logic. Up there, the peaks carved out pockets of still air where the wind couldn't bite. That single crack in the rock saved my life. By day 5, I was counting my gear with that same cold logic. My radio was junk. I had tried to save it during the ascent, but it smashed against a rock and moisture ruined the internal electronics. Even if it worked, transmitting would be suicide. They had tracking gear, and the signal from my location would have painted a target on me. I had 8 MRE packets and the emergency rations in my kit. It was enough for 10 days if I was careful, but the freeze burns fuel fast. I gave myself 7 days. Water was easy if I melted snow. I was liquefying it using my own body heat, keeping a bag against my skin until it turned to water. Slow and miserable, but effective. Ammo: 37 rounds for the M24 and 45 for my sidearm. It was more than enough for what I needed. My injuries were minor. Just a deep gash on my forearm from the climb, already starting to heal. Cracked ribs and a swollen ankle, but I could still put weight on it. I would survive. But that was not the mission. From that new perch, even more exposed than my original observation point, I had a different view of the valley. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. I could see deep into the northern passes, routes that had been hidden from me before. And what I saw chilled me more than the mountain air ever could. The enemy wasn't just getting ready for a skirmish. They were prepping for an annihilation. Looking through my spotting scope, I counted at least a company-sized unit, maybe even more heavy weapon teams. Mortars and crew-served machine guns were being dug in on the ridge across from the outpost. They were timing a coordinated 3-pronged attack with massive, overwhelming firepower. My team at the outpost did not stand a chance. Let's look at the math I was running in my head. Hayes had maybe 40 troops, and most of them weren't even frontline infantry. It was a good defensive spot, but nothing could hold against that kind of force. They would be pinned by the mortars and heavy fire, then wiped out from 3 sides. It would be over quickly unless I did something. The problem was the distance and the angle. I spotted their command post by watching how their groups were moving. The range was roughly 4,200 meters, over 2.5 miles. I had hit targets at 2,000 meters in the past. My personal best back then was 2,400 meters in perfect weather. This was far from a perfect day. Winds at that altitude were 40 to 50 miles per hour, with worse gusts. -20 degrees, and the thin air was about to play hell with the trajectory. It helped my velocity, but the math got messy. I was shooting at a steep downward angle, which meant recalculating gravity entirely. Plus, at that range, the actual curvature of the Earth became a factor. I had to weigh the Coriolis effect, the planet's rotation, against the bullet's path. It seemed impossible. I pulled out my range card and started making notes. My pencil kept freezing, forcing me to crunch every single calculation by hand. My ballistic computer was dead. The radio had gone silent with it. I tracked wind speed at my position, at the halfway point, and the target. I used shifting snow and bending trees to estimate how the air moved. I listened to the wind howling through the peaks, gauging the high-altitude air. I knew those formulas by heart. I'd run them 1,000 times before. I calculated exactly how much the bullet would drop at that range. My M118 LR rounds would drop about 1,200 inches. At 4,200 meters, that's a 100-foot drop. I'd have to aim at the sky just to hit a target on Earth. I adjusted for the Coriolis effect on a southward shot in this hemisphere. The bullet would drift east. I mapped out 18 inches of drift. Then there was the target, hoping they would stay still behind their cover. I needed the highest value target to cause the most chaos possible. It was likely the commander, though I couldn't be certain from that far. Sometimes, taking out the communication specialist is more effective. I only had one shot. If I missed, they'd know they were being watched. They would accelerate their timeline and hit our outpost immediately. I'd have failed completely, doing nothing but giving my own position away. If I succeeded, I knew I could buy Hayes time and create confusion. Maybe even make them think they were facing an entire platoon, not me. And if I was lucky, they might just call off the assault entirely. I closed my eyes, letting the wind hit me. My temperature was bottoming out. I'd been conserving heat, staying as still as a frozen stone. But I couldn't wait forever. I was running out of time and options. I could move to a warmer spot, or take this shot and accept it. I thought about Brennan, the kid who looked at me for every answer. I thought about Hayes, Chen, Reyes, Walsh, and Lou, my whole family. It wasn't really a choice. I opened my eyes and got to work. I piled up rocks to steady my rifle and brushed away the snow. I cleared the shooting lane and settled in to wait for the long haul. Then I just waited. The enemy would move whenever they felt ready. And when they did, I'd be ready too, even if it was my end. The shivering hit by hour 3. I knew exactly what was happening. Hypothermia was setting in. My core temperature was sliding away from me. It dropped despite my layers and that thin emergency blanket around my shoulders. I knew every survival trick, but I knew I could still pull back. I could have found better shelter or tried to make it back to camp. Looking back now, that was the safe move, but I wasn't built for safety. Through the glass, I watched the commander finally crawl from his tent. Looking back, I'd spent 6 hours watching him, mapping every move he made. He was a total professional. Methodical. He checked on his soldiers regularly. I watched him inspect every weapon position personally. He spent his time consulting with his second-in-command, a solid leader. That made him the priority target. Distance was a problem, but time was worse. Time was up. I could feel my body finally shutting down. My hands were shaking despite my efforts. My mind felt slow, like I was wading through deep sludge. Those were red flags I couldn't ignore. If I waited any longer, I wouldn't have the strength to take the shot, no matter the opening. But rushing meant missing, and I'd waste the only real advantage I still had. I forced myself to breathe, slow, methodical. The freezing air scorched my lungs, but that burn kept me sharp. I'd trained for years, but nothing could prepare me for that moment. No simulation mimics sitting alone on a mountain at 20 below for an impossible shot. Still, the principle stayed the same. Control what you can, accept the rest. I could control my breathing, my positioning, and the math in my head. I couldn't control the wind or whether the commander would finally step out. So I focused on my side of the glass. I rechecked my data. I'd used my knife to carve the final numbers into a flat stone. A permanent record for when my memory inevitably failed me. Wind speed 43 miles per hour, gusting to 58, heading northwest. 22 below, humidity at 80%. 2,800 feet of altitude. My ammunition was built for this precision. but even custom lead bows to physics. At 4,200 meters, the bullet flies long. 6 seconds in the air. 6 seconds for 1,000 variables to ruin everything. I ran the sequence in my head. It felt more like a ritual. Identify the target. Wait for the still moment when he stops moving. Wait for the wind to drop and the window to open. Settle in. Let the rifle become part of me. Control my breathing. Slow it down until I can hear my pulse drumming in my ears. Find that pause between breaths, that split second of perfect frozen stillness. Align the crosshairs. Not on him. He was way too far for that. Aim where the math says the bullet needs to go. Aim at empty space. Squeeze the trigger. Don't pull. Make it as inevitable as gravity itself. Then wait. 6 seconds is an age. Plenty of time for a bullet to travel. Time for doubt. Time for one last prayer. I was never the religious type, but back then I understood prayer perfectly. It was about accepting that some things were just out of my hands. That I could do everything right and still fail. I could live with that. What I couldn't live with was not trying. My hands finally stopped shaking. That was a bad sign. My body was hoarding heat, pulling blood away, protecting the core. Soon, my fingers wouldn't work at all. I wouldn't be able to feel the trigger soon. The window was closing. I locked into position. I became a statue made of ice and determination. I'd be here for hours. I couldn't risk a single movement. I couldn't risk adjusting. This was the position. This was my commitment. Through my scope, I watched the enemy commander. They were planning something. Final preparations before the assault. I could feel it coming. They thought they were safe, that the storm had neutralized any threat from above. They believed my platoon was blind, isolated, and doomed. They were wrong about that last part. My breathing slowed. My heart rate dropped. My world contracted to a circle of mathematical certainty. I would take this shot. I had to give Hayes a chance. Whatever happened after that was in hands much larger than mine. The cold bit deep. My body screamed for movement and warmth. I gave it none of those things. My greatest weapon wasn't the rifle. It was patience, the ability to endure absolute discomfort. To wait when every instinct screams at you to act. To remain absolutely still while the world tries to shake you apart. I had patience. I knew the enemy would give me an opening. They always did. And when they did, I'd be ready. Hayes knew we were in trouble when they started ranging. The first rounds fell short, exploding in the snow near the perimeter. These were probing shots, testing our defenses and mapping our positions. Someone shouted, "Incoming!" It was unnecessary, but a reflex. The platoon scrambled to defensive positions with the efficiency of practice. We drilled for this, but training assumes you have intelligence about enemy positioning. You and I know that operating blind is a death sentence. Count the rounds. Hayes needed to know the count. Burke was already on it. Listening with the intensity of someone whose life depended on it, he counted 4. No, 5 tubes. 82 millimeters meant a company-sized element at the very minimum. Jen warned Hayes that they were walking the rounds in. The next volley would be closer. She was right. The second barrage fell 30 meters away. We felt the concussion. Burke asked to return fire. Hayes just shook his head. We lacked the ammunition for a sustained engagement. Let them waste their rounds. It was sound tactical logic, but it felt wrong back then. Every instinct screamed at Hayes to fight back and show strength. He refused to be trapped like an animal, but instinct gets soldiers killed. Discipline kept us alive. The third volley was right on target. 2 rounds hit the eastern bunker, collapsing part of the roof. No casualties, but Walsh's team was buried under sandbags and debris. Another round landed in the yard and destroyed our only transport. "They have a spotter," Reyes said, someone who can see us. Hayes had reached the same conclusion. They had eyes on us, likely from that same ridge I was watching. Without my counter-observation, they were exposed. Webb called from the radio. Reports of movement on all 3 approaches. They were coming. Multiple squads moving under fire. A coordinated assault, just like we feared. Hayes moved to the tactical display as the noose tightened. Red markers multiplied, surrounding us. Over 40 enemy soldiers. You and I can see the trap closing in. It meant there were likely twice as many as they could actually see. Chen whispered that we were outnumbered 3-1. 5-1 if they had a reserve element, Burke added. Hayes studied the map, searching for options that simply did not exist. They could retreat to interior positions, abandon the perimeter, and fortify the main building. It would buy time, but surrender any hope of a breakout. They would be besieged with low supplies and no rescue until the storm cleared. Or they could attempt a breakout, fighting through one of the approach routes, and take their chances in the mountains. Both options ended the same way, just a question of time. Prepare the interior fallback, Hayes ordered. But we hold the line as long as we make them pay for every meter. Mortars fell in a steady rhythm now, suppressing every defensive position, keeping their heads down while the enemy assault teams closed in. In the eastern bunker, Walsh and her team dug out from the collapse. Brennan was there, his face masked in dust and blood from a head wound. "Are you okay?" Walsh asked. Brennan nodded, checking his rifle automatically. She would know what to do, he said. Riley would see them coming. She would tell us where to focus fire. Walsh stayed silent. I see now that the kid was right. I would have made the difference. But I was gone, and they were left entirely on their own. The assault hit from 3 directions at once. Machine gun fire raked the line, forcing cover before the infantry moved. Using fire and maneuver tactics, one team pinned them while another advanced. They were professionals. Engage at will, Hayes ordered. The platoon opened fire, and for several minutes it was total chaos. Rifles cracked, machine guns boomed, and mortars screamed overhead in the cold air. It all mixed with the howling wind and the hiss of falling snow. They held the first wave. Bodies fell as the enemy retreated to regroup. But Hayes knew it was temporary. The next wave would be much stronger. They had learned from the first assault, finding weak points and adjusting tactics. Ammunition count, he ordered. The reports were even worse than he had feared. At this rate, they had maybe 2 more fights left before they were down to knives. Brennan appeared at the command post, his eyes wide and wild. We must signal her. If Riley is out there, she needs to know we are in trouble. Tommy, Hayes said, even if she were alive and watching, she could not help us. She is one person against a company. You do not know that, Brennan snapped. You do not know what she can do. Hayes wanted him to let it go, to focus on reality. But he saw something in Brennan's eyes that stopped him cold. Not delusion, but faith, a real, unshakable faith that I was still out there, that I had not abandoned them, that I was doing something to help. Looking back, they needed that faith. It was likely the only thing that kept them going. Everyone to your positions, Hayes ordered. The second wave is incoming. The enemy attacked relentlessly. We held the line, but it cost us dearly. 2 soldiers wounded, and ammunition dropped another 20%. The western bunker took a direct hit and was abandoned. The noose was tightening. Looking back, I see Hayes at the window, staring out at the white-out battlefield. Bodies stayed right where they fell, slowly vanishing under the fresh powder. He was thinking of me then, wondering if I was out there watching and calculating. It was a comforting thought, but the reality back then was much colder. He believed I was gone and that they were all about to die. The only question left was how many we would take with us. I had lost all feeling in my fingers 2 hours earlier. I tried every trick. pressing them deep into my armpits for warmth and breathing on them. Nothing worked. Back then, the cold had already won. My hands were just frozen blocks at my sides, but I still felt that trigger. That was all that mattered. I watched the commander leading the assault through my scope. He stood on a small ridge, likely thinking he was well out of harm's way. But he stayed close enough to maintain tactical control. He was dead wrong on both counts. I had been tracking him for 7 hours, barely breathing, becoming part of the mountain. I knew his patterns. His gestures when giving orders, his unconscious habit of touching his radio every few minutes. He checked his watch every 30 minutes exactly. That last detail was what killed him. Because when a target becomes that predictable, that rhythmic, I could time my shot to the second. 90 seconds to go. I recall running through my final ballistics calculations one more time. I had accounted for every possible variable. Now, it was just about the execution. Wind at my position was steady at 45 miles per hour from the northwest. I had been studying the snow patterns for hours. By then, I had internalized the rhythm of the gusts. Mid-range wind was a guess, but the blowing snow suggested 35 to 40. I estimated the target wind by the flags near the command post. Maybe 20 to 25. The temperature gap to the floor was 15 degrees. Warmer air is less dense, and that affects the bullet flight. The Coriolis effect at that latitude and distance, shooting south, would drift the round east. I had calculated 18 inches of drift. Bullet drop was the final factor. At 4,200 meters. Even with my precision rifle, the round would drop 98 feet from the bore line. I had to aim at a spot in empty air, trusting math to guide that projectile down to earth. Flight time was 6 seconds. 60 seconds until the window. I settled deeper into my final position. My body had gone beyond cold, into a different state entirely. A place where pain became abstract. The discomfort was there, but it didn't matter. Hypothermia has its own strange mercy. My breathing slowed to almost nothing. Every breath was measured, deliberate, and perfectly timed. In, hold, out, hold. The shot would come in that natural pause after the exhale. 45 seconds left. Through my glass, I could see the outpost assault. Muzzle flashes, explosions, and silhouettes moving through the deep snow. Hayes and the others were fighting for their lives. I could save them if this worked. 30 seconds. Looking back now, I can still see that commander briefing his officers, finalizing the plan. He was arrogant, convinced victory was his. I settled my crosshairs, but not on his chest. I aimed 30 feet high and 12 feet left. A ghost point in the empty sky. That was the math. The adjustment for bullet drop and the savage mountain wind. It looked impossible, aiming at nothing, but I trusted the physics and the cold numbers. Plus 1,000 hours of training telling me it was possible. 15 seconds to go. My heart rate slowed to 40 beats per minute. The world narrowed to that magnified circle, the cold steel, and the slow rhythm of my breath. 10 seconds left. I saw the commander check his watch. Right on time, my breath hitched in a natural pause. Total stillness. 5 seconds. He looked up, turning to speak to his second in command. The crosshairs held steady on nothingness. Every variable was set. Every calculation was final. At that point, it was just physics and faith. I squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked hard against my shoulder. The wind swallowed the crack of the shot instantly. Lost to the cold mountain air. For 6 long seconds, that bullet was airborne. 6 seconds of wind gusts and shifting temperatures, fighting to bend its path. Even the Earth's rotation applied its force. 6 seconds where I was completely helpless. I could only watch and pray that my math was right. That every guess was true, and that the universe would listen just this once. Then, through the glass, I saw his head snap back. He collapsed like a puppet with cut strings. Their entire line froze in shock. You and I can imagine their confusion. Their leader was there, and then he was not. No sound, no warning, no clue where that death had come from. I didn't move. I didn't celebrate. I didn't even dare to breathe. One shot, one kill. But the chaos was only starting. I watched confusion infect their ranks like a terminal disease. Their officers screamed conflicting orders. Men were looking around wildly, terrified, searching for a threat they couldn't see, hear, or even understand. You can't fight a ghost. Their assault on our outpost began to fail. It wasn't over, but they were hesitant. That doubt saved lives that day. I finally let my breath out. My hands started shaking, and not from the cold. It was pure adrenaline, the release after 7 hours of total forced control. I had done it. 4,200 meters through wind and cold and conditions that should have made success impossible. I had made the shot, but I wasn't finished. First came the silence. Hayes heard it before it clicked, the sudden end to their coordinated fire. Just confused shouting in a foreign tongue, the sound of an army losing its spine. "They are pulling back," Chen whispered, sounding like she couldn't believe it. Hayes watched through his own scope as the enemy abandoned their positions. This wasn't a tactical withdrawal. It was something closer to a panic. Their officers were screaming orders that nobody was following. The tight lines they had held all day simply dissolved into total chaos. "What the hell?" Burke muttered. Reyes was on the thermal scope, scanning the enemy lines. Their command post is a mess. I had taken their leader, and with him, their entire will to keep fighting. Walsh saw the bodies I left. Someone went down hard. "Sniper," he suggested. "From where?" Reyes barked. "We are surrounded." "No one is out there except—" He suddenly stopped. Everyone in the command post just stared at each other. That impossible thought took hold of them all. "No," Chen insisted. "Look at the distance. I was alive." Brennan appeared at the door. His expression had shifted. "I told you," Brennan yelled. "I was alive and I just saved them." "We do not know that," Hayes started, but he had no conviction. Because how else could they explain it? The enemy was moments away from overrunning their position. Victory was certain. And then their commander. It had to be their leader, dropped by a single shot. Struck down by a shot that came from nowhere. From a distance and angle that should not be possible. Webb was frantically working his radio, cycling through frequencies. "Riley, if you hear this, respond." "Blackbird, this is Eagle Actual, respond." Static. "I had destroyed my radio," Reyes said. "That is why they never heard me. I went dark intentionally." It made sense. A working radio was a liability. In some situations, it could be tracked to locate you. I would have known that. I made the choice to go silent, rather than risk compromise. "Sir, they are regrouping," Burke reported. The assault was over, but they were not running. They were consolidating. Hayes moved to the window. The enemy had fallen back. They fell back to defensive positions, establishing a perimeter. They were hurt, confused, but still combat effective. And now they knew someone was out there. Someone with a capability to kill from an impossible range. "They will be looking for me," Chen whispered. Hayes nodded. The enemy would be sending teams into the mountains, trying to locate and eliminate me. They would be systematic. I was alone, likely injured, and certainly exhausted. I was low on supplies. I bought them time, but at what cost? "We need to help her," Brennan said. "We do not know where." I could be anywhere in a 50 square kilometer area, Reyes noted. Then we search every inch, Brennan snapped. Hayes held up a hand. Nobody is moving until we understand the tactical situation. But even as he spoke, he was calculating. The storm had lessened enough that movement was possible. If they sent out a team, if they had some idea where to look. The shock came from high elevation, Reyes said, thinking aloud. Probably one of the northern peaks. I needed that high angle. I had to be above the ridgeline. Chen pulled up a map. That narrowed it down to a few spots. Looking back, I know they were desperate to find me. Brennan wanted to split the team, but Hayes knew the danger. They were torn between leaving me out there and walking into a trap. I had sacrificed everything to give them a chance. Leaving me felt like betrayal, but Hayes had to protect the whole platoon. You and I both know that risking 6 lives for one is a deadly gamble. Webb, I heard Hayes say finally, keep trying to reach her on all channels. He knew if my primary radio was smashed, I might still have a backup. Webb adjusted his dials while Hayes turned to Chen, demanding a full threat assessment. The enemy was regrouping. He needed to know their most likely next move. Chen replied that they would either strike again with force or retreat for more reinforcements. It all depended on just how spooked they were. Looking through the window, Hayes kept watch on the enemy positions. They had found good defensive cover and clearly planned to stay in that area. But their confidence was gone. They realized our position had a reach they never expected, and capabilities that caught them completely off guard. That one shot from me had changed the whole dynamic of the fight. Movement, Reyes shouted. Northeast sector, someone is moving slow. Everyone went ice cold. Friend or foe, sniper or scout. Through his thermal scope, Reyes tracked my shadow. My body temperature was low, very low. Whoever it was had been out there forever. Hayes asked for a positive identification. No luck, too much interference. I was moving toward them, but very slowly, carefully, definitely not the way someone would lead an assault. More like someone at their absolute limit, pushing forward on nothing but pure will. Sir, Webb suddenly broke in, his voice tight. I have got something faint here. Then my voice came through the speaker, barely audible over the wind and static. Need extraction. Enemy search teams are moving. It was me. My voice was slurred with cold and exhaustion, but they knew it. Brennan made a sound that could have been a laugh, a sob, or both. Riley, say again, Webb called back. You are coming in weak and broken. Cannot hold position. I need extraction now. I gave them 3 hours. Then, nothing but static once again. Hayes made his choice instantly. Chen, he said, you are in command here. Reyes, Burke, Brennan, you are with me. We are bringing her home. Chen mentioned the risk. I know the risk, Hayes snapped, but I am taking it. She gave us a chance. Now we give her one. Outside, the storm was fading, but still very dangerous. Looking back, you and I can see that better visibility was a double-edged sword. They could see further, but so could the enemy. The 4 of them moved out, tracking the thermal signature Reyes had found. They moved with weapons ready, knowing enemy search teams were hunting for me too. Everyone out there was doing the same thing, looking for Riley Patterson. The difference was my team would reach me first. My signal came in fragments, like broken glass. I told them my position was compromised. Enemy patrol grid, November 3. Webb worked the radio, his hands shaking as he listened. He tried to boost the signal, desperate to pull my voice out of the static. I cannot stay moving too. Riley, a team is on the way, Webb said. Can you reach grid Mike 7? Silence. Then I said, negative. Ankle, moving slower than steady. I was injured. They suspected it, but the confirmation made my situation real. I was exhausted, freezing, and being hunted by enemy search teams. I was still fighting back then. Outside the outpost, Hayes and his team pushed through knee-deep snow. Brennan was on point, driven by a drive that went beyond tactical logic. Reyes followed him, weapon ready, eyes scanning the white for threats. Burt guarded the rear, checking our 6 every 30 seconds. Hayes asked how far. Reyes checked the GPS, 2 kilometers to the thermal signature we identified. But if I was moving, then they would adjust, Hayes finished. The wind had dropped to almost nothing, a blessing and a curse. Easier to move and hear, but easier to be heard. Every step they took sounded impossibly loud in the quiet. "Contact!" Brennan hissed, dropping to one knee. My team froze instantly. Ahead, maybe 300 meters. Figures moved through the heavy snow. 4 of them in a search pattern, rifles ready, an enemy patrol. Hayes signaled for cover. They pressed into the snow behind a rocky outcrop, barely breathing, watching the patrol move right across their path. Those soldiers were searching methodically, checking every hole and possible hiding place. They knew someone was up there. They were determined to find me. That patrol passed within 50 meters of where my team was hidden. Hayes counted heartbeats, watching them vanish into the white landscape. When they were finally out of sight, he signaled to move. Reyes noted they were between the team and me. "Then we go around them," Hayes replied. They swung wide to avoid the patrol. It added 20 minutes to their movement time. 20 minutes that I might not have had. Webb's voice crackled in the earpiece. "Eagle Actual, be advised. We are tracking at least 3 more enemy patrols in your sector. They are saturating the area." "Understood," Hayes replied. "Any update from Blackbird?" "Negative. No contact with me for 7 minutes." 7 minutes of silence. In that cold, 7 minutes could have been fatal. Brennan was moving faster then, less concerned with tactical discipline than with speed. Hayes understood the impulse, but could not allow it. "Tommy," he said quietly, "stay focused. We do not help Riley by getting ourselves killed." Brennan slowed slightly, but Hayes saw the tension in every line of his body. The kid was holding himself together through nothing but sheer force of will. They reached the ridge where my thermal signature had first been detected. Nothing, just snow and rock and ice. "Spread out," Hayes ordered. "Search pattern. Stay within visual range of each other." They began to search, looking for signs, tracks, disturbed snow, or my blood. Anything that would show I had been there. Reyes found it first. Here, a shallow hole in the snow, sheltered by an overhang of rock. Signs of life. Melted snow, refrozen in patterns that suggested my body heat. An MRE wrapper and coordinates I had scratched into the rock face. "I left them a trail," Burke said, with something like awe in his voice. Those coordinates pointed northeast, higher into the mountains, toward positions that were even more exposed and even more dangerous. I was leading them away from the enemy patrols, Hayes realized then, drawing them deeper into terrain I knew better than anyone. "Move," he ordered. They followed the trail, scratch marks on rocks and signs of disturbed snow. Tiny signs that only someone trained to track or evade would recognize. I was leaving them breadcrumbs, just praying they were smart enough to follow. Another patrol appeared ahead. The boys hit the dirt once more. This time, they were closer, close enough for Hayes to hear their radio chatter. He saw their breath fogging in the ice. Once clear, Brennan pointed up at me. High on the ridge, 600 meters up, I made my move. I was slow and deliberate, but human. "Is that her?" Burke asked. Reyes checked his scope. "Can't confirm. Too much heat distortion," he said. "Yeah, that is her. I see the rifle." I was climbing higher, moving away from the enemy, but also away from safety and any survival chance. "She is pulling them away from us," Hayes realized. I was drawing fire. "We have to reach her first," Brennan said. Then they began to climb. At that altitude, Every breath felt like swallowing shards of broken glass. The cold bit through their layers, but the team kept climbing toward me. They tracked the shadow above. They followed me as I led the way. I was leading them toward the only sanctuary we could find in that hell. An hour later, they found the cave. Really, just a narrow crack in the rock. It was barely wide enough for a person, and there they finally found me. I was sitting against the stone, rifle across my lap, my eyes half closed. I looked up as they approached. A ghost of a smile touched my lips. "Took you long enough," I whispered. My voice was almost gone. Brennan rushed in, but Reyes stopped him. They had to be careful. Hypothermia required slow warming and gentle handling. Hayes keyed his radio. "Eagle actual to base. We have Blackbird. I repeat, she is alive." My eyes found his. "Your shot saved us," Hayes told me. Everything changed. I nodded slowly, though it took everything I had. "Good. That is good." My eyes drifted shut. "Riley, stay with us," Reyes barked. He was already ripping open thermal blankets and those warming packs. He started raising my core temperature. "I am not going anywhere," I murmured. "Too tired to die." Despite the cold, the danger, and those hunting patrols, Hayes actually smiled. Looking back, I realized I had really done it. Against impossible odds, in conditions that should have killed me, I survived. More than that, I saved them. Now, let us see how they saved me. Getting me down that mountain took every ounce of skill and luck. I couldn't walk. My ankle had swollen to twice its normal size. The cold robbed my coordination. Reyes and Burke built a makeshift litter. Using packs and paracord, they made a platform to drag through the snow. 3 enemy patrols stand between us and the outpost, Hayes said, checking his map. "We cannot avoid all of them, so we do not even try," I said. My voice was stronger after the warm fluids, but it was still fragile. "We use them." Hayes looked at me and asked for an explanation. "They are searching for one person," I told him. "Just me." "They're not expecting a team. You want to ambush them," Brennan said. "I want to make them regret continuing the search," I corrected him. "Hit one patrol hard. Prove to them that I am not alone out here. They will pull back for reinforcements. That buys us time. It was a risk." Looking back, staying put was riskier. Evading 3 patrols while they carried my broken body was nearly impossible. "We chose the ground," Hayes decided. "Set an ambush. Make it quick. Break contact before they can respond." We moved down the mountain. I lay on the litter while they took turns dragging and providing security. Every 100 meters felt like a mile. Every sound could have been a patrol. Reyes found the spot, a narrow pass that funneled movement where we had clear fields of fire. "Next patrol that comes through here," he said, "we own them." They set up a textbook L-shaped ambush, placing 2 soldiers on each leg of our formation. I insisted on being positioned where I could contribute fire, regardless of my condition. "I didn't survive 4 days on that mountain just to be dead weight now," I told them. We waited. 30 minutes later, the patrol appeared. 4 soldiers in a loose formation, confident. Their weapons were lowered. They never stood a chance. Hayes initiated, and for 15 seconds, it was pure, controlled violence. Precise fire, disciplined bursts, no wasted ammo. When it was over, the enemy was down and we were already moving. We used the confusion to put distance between ourselves and the response that would inevitably come. "Contact! Contact!" We heard it over their frequencies. Patrol 4 is down, multiple hostiles. The effect was immediate. Other patrols called in, requesting support and consolidating positions. Their search pattern collapsed as they shifted into defensive postures. Just like I had predicted, we moved faster now. We knew we had a brief window before they regrouped and searched with greater force. I saw the outpost coming into view as the sun set. Only a little light filtered through those perpetual gray clouds. Chen had teams watching, ready to provide cover. "Eagle Actual, this is base," he transmitted. "We have you visual. The path is clear," Chen said. "Come home." Those last 500 meters felt longer than any distance I had traveled before. My skin temperature was too low. Despite their efforts, I needed real medical care. Soon we crossed the perimeter wire at dusk. The platoon had turned out to watch us arrive. Soldiers lined the defenses, silent and respectful. When they saw me on that litter, someone started clapping, then another, then everyone. My eyes opened slightly. "Tell them to save it for the memorial service," I whispered. "No memorial service," Brennan said fiercely. "You are going to be fine." The medic, Jordan Mills, was waiting there with a full trauma kit. They transferred me to a heated room and began carefully treating my hypothermia. As they assessed my other injuries, Hayes watched through the window while Mills worked. I was unconscious by then. My body finally allowed itself to shut down. I was safe. "She is going to make it, right?" Brennan asked him quietly. "She survived 4 days alone in sub-zero temperatures," Chen replied. "She made an impossible shot. She led us on a chase through enemy territory. I would bet on her against anything." Hayes agreed, but kept that to himself. I had pushed far beyond any normal human limits. Looking back, the question was never whether I was strong enough to survive. I had already proven that. I often wonder now what parts of me that mountain kept forever. Between the frostbite and exhaustion, the price I paid was heavy. I lived, and my guys lived because I pulled that trigger. That night, they pulled back. Not a rout, just a tactical shift. Their commander was gone, along with their momentum and their nerve. They realized then that an easy victory was a total fantasy. Just after midnight, the storm finally decided to break for us. Stars finally cut through, sharp, freezing, and more beautiful than I remember. Back in the medical bay, I slept while my body began mending itself. Brennan stayed by my side, ignoring every order to go get rest. "She came back," he whispered to the room. He always knew I would. Hayes watched from the door, thinking one word: faith. Brennan had faith when others only had doubt. Turns out, he was right. Sometimes that matters more than logic or any tactical assessment. Sometimes it is enough. Let us look at what happened 3 weeks later. The report detailed the enemy strike on Forward Operating Base Summit. Combat in extreme mountain terrain during the worst weather possible. The records noted we held the line with minimal casualties, crediting precision fire from a high observation point for our survival. My name appeared nowhere in those official Army records. I asked for that. No medals, no glory, no official recognition. That 4,200-meter shot stayed buried and highly classified. Operational security, they said. Best not to show our hand. But among military snipers, the story found its own wings. Whispers, knowing nods, a legend that grew taller with every retelling. The ghost in the snow. The sniper who vanished for 4 days. 1 bullet saved the platoon. Of course, the details got exaggerated. The range grew to 5 kilometers, then 6 in later versions. My time alone on the peak stretched from 7 days to 10. That single killing blow turned into 3 shots, or even 5. People said I wiped an entire team with invisible fire. I heard the rumors and stayed quiet. Let them believe it. The truth was always simpler and far stranger than legend. I did my job, that was all. My recovery took months. I lost 3 toes and 2 fingers on my shooting hand to frostbite. Doctors told me I would never shoot the same way again. Nerve damage ruined my trigger control and my ability to stay steady. They did not know me. I adapted, changed my grip and technique. I lived on the range, rebuilding the muscle memory I lost. 6 months later, I qualified as an expert marksman once more. Within 8 months, I was right back with my platoon. Hayes tried to push me toward a warm, safe teaching job. "With all due respect, sir," I told him, "that sounds like hell." I went back to long-range work and started training Brennan. Brennan had real talent, and as we saw, the enemy never attacked again. The high ground belonged to us. I was always watching back then. On the first anniversary of that shot, my platoon held a quiet ceremony. No cameras or press allowed, just the soldiers who stood by me. We stood on the outpost wall at sunset, staring north toward the mountains. I had spent 4 days alone in the cold. Chen raised a coffee cup. Alcohol was not permitted on deployment. "To Blackbird," she said simply. "To Blackbird," the others echoed. I stood there, awkward with the attention. But I understood why they needed it. Those people were my family. We needed that closure, an acknowledgement of what we survived together. "Did you know it would work?" Brennan asked me quietly. "When you pulled that trigger, was it possible?" I considered the question. My honest answer was no. The variables had been too extreme. The conditions were poor and the distance too great. Logically, I should have failed. But I took the shot anyway. I knew it had to work. So, I made it work. That was the simple truth of it. Not just skill or training, it was will, the refusal to accept failure. I would not let my people die without trying. Later that night, after the others went back to duty, I climbed to the outpost peak. From there, I could see the ridgeline where I nearly died. The peaks looked different now, less hostile, more like home. I knew every contour, every hiding spot, and all their cruel beauty. Part of me is still up there, left in that rock crack, frozen in memory. The part of me that viewed survival as optional. Duty required sacrifice. I was lucky enough to get both. But it was close, too close. Would I do it all again? Take that same risk without hesitation? Yes, that is what snipers do. We take the impossible shots, the ones nobody else can make. We survive conditions others cannot, for reasons more important than safety. We watch, we wait, and when the moment comes, we do not miss. A gust of wind hit the outpost, carrying snow and old memories. Somewhere in the dark, another enemy was looking for a weakness. They would not find it, not while I was watching, silent and patient. I was the mountain ghost, that legend who fired from 4,000 meters. That moment changed everything. I turned and headed back inside. The falling snow erased my tracks. Some stories should not be told. Legends live better in silence. Some shots speak louder than words. The mountain remembers. My platoon remembers. I still remember.